but we only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book.
So their perspective on the kingdom is now but not yet. How are progressive dispensationalists building into the kingdom today?
Well, they talk an awful lot about something called the holistic gospel, where they believe, and I've got the quotes in the book where they say it in their own writings, that the function of the church is to change the structures of society. And of course, that, by the way, fits really nicely with critical race theory. Mm-hmm. If you believe the structures of the United States are inherently racist, yes, which I reject that viewpoint. But if you believe that,
we all do.
Then the function of the church is to change those structures. And, quite frankly, I don't find that in the Great Commission. What Jesus said is go make disciples. We're here to reach and teach, to evangelize and disciple. We're living in Satan's world. Not that we can't have some kind of positive influence on society while we're here, but reforming the culture, is not our major task. And so I think progressive dispensationalism moves us away from the Great Commission and moves us into more of this holistic gospel, mentality. By the way, if you want to change society, look at what Paul did in Acts 19, where he evangelized everybody there when he was at the school of Tyrannus, remember, for a couple years. Mm-hmm. And what did people stop doing? They stopped buying their idols, mm-hmm, because they were saved now. And so he indirectly drove the idol makers out of business. I mean, if you want to change society, evangelize the world, and society will change.
Well, yeah, he upset the idol makers there for a little bit, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So we're talking about it's a foundation for the social gospel then.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd make complete sense.
Yeah, social gospel being the, you do social good. Well, let me back up. We should do social good, but we should always use that as a platform to preach the gospel. In other words, if we're just involved in Habitat for Humanity and all this kind of stuff that has nothing to do with the gospel, then we're missing our purpose, because what good does it do to feed someone's stomach for 24 hours if they go into an eternal hell?
How much of a balance do you think there should be between evangelism, and this is kind of not having to do with your book, but evangelism and just commenting on what you said, and doing things like outreaches with food, setting up a homeless shelter and those kind of things. Do you think that can distract from actually doing church work rather than building a kingdom?
Well, holistic gospel, it's really easy to get confused about what your purpose is. Mm-hmm. I believe humanitarian work, first of all, I'm not even sure that's the job of the church. I'm unconvinced, mm-hmm, that that's a job God gave to the church, particularly when Jesus said, the poor you'll have with you always. Now, if an individual Christian wants to get involved in that, then great. But I also think they should use it as a platform to share the gospel. The moment the humanitarian work takes over and the gospel becomes secondary or non-existent, you're now dealing with another gospel. It's what it was called earlier, the social gospel. So it's a very careful balancing act with all of that.
Yeah. Let's talk briefly about what are the requirements for a kingdom, and why is the progressive dispensationalism's kingdom now not sufficient to meet those requirements?
Well, Dr. Pentecost had his three requirements for a kingdom, a ruler, a realm, and a reign. I'm a little bit different in the sense that I think the requirements are laid out in the prophets. In order to say that the kingdom is here, the requirements of the prophets, who are a lamp shining in a dark place, you have to say those requirements are here. So you have to have people, when they die at the age of 100, they're thought to be accursed because they died so young. You have to have the sun 7 times brighter than what it currently is. Isaiah 30, verse 27. You have to have a millennial temple. You have to have a river flowing out of the millennial temple into the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea comes back to life.
We don't have that right now, huh?
No, I've been to the Dead Sea. Yeah, you have to have a child able to stick his hand into the cobra's nest and not be harmed. You have to have peace in the world kingdom. You have to have agricultural prosperity all over the earth. You have to have no more war. And, the reason progressive dispensationalists and others reject that is they have a hermeneutic which says the New Testament changes the Old. Now, they're not as radical as the replacement theologians, which says the New Testament abolishes the Old in that sense, but they think the New Testament adds these complementary layers of meaning that aren't found. So they don't have to see correspondence between what's happening today and what the prophets predict in order to dogmatically say the kingdom is here. So it really relates to their hermeneutic.
Yeah, one way progressive dispensationalists is kind of throw it away is if they make the Abrahamic covenant conditional, right? The Israelites, this is the final time they rejected Christ. All right, now their land's taken from them. But you mentioned in their book there's a difference between owning the land and possessing it. Can you explain that difference, the difference?
Right.
Good question.
Right. Well, just to be clear, because I want to represent people fairly, I don't think progressive dispensationalists have gone that far by saying that the Abrahamic covenant is conditional. Okay. I do think replacement theologians have done that, but they haven't done it quite. They're trying to find a mediation between the two camps, but it's studying an interplay between the Abrahamic and Mosaic. The Abrahamic gives the nation of Israel ownership over her blessings. What are her blessings? Land, seed, and blessing. So she will forever own those. Now, whether any generation enjoys what they own, they have to comply with the Mosaic law. And according to John 5, the Mosaic law points to Jesus. In other words, they have to enthrone the king on the king's terms. And until that happens, Israel owns but doesn't enjoy. Only when she enthrones the king on the king's terms will she both own and enjoy, and then the kingdom will be an arrival. So you can have the whole world get saved, but if tiny Israel remains in unbelief, you can't have the kingdom on the earth. Conversely, you can have the whole world reject Christ. But if tiny Israel nationally believes, then she will have complied with the Mosaic covenant. She'll be the owner and the enjoyer, and the kingdom will come. So everything is riding on what Israel is going to do with her Messiah. And what I'm talking about here is a national leadership decision to enthrone the king. I'm not talking about individual Jews getting saved periodically in the church age. And so by covenantal design, the whole thing's riding on Israel's shoulders.